The hallway was dark and long. It was old. It was covered with mold, as it rotted at its core. Water fell on the sides of the walls in small streams. The floor had a small pool of water lying all about it. The hair on the back of Fluttershy's neck stood on end, but she walked forward into the darkness. Every step echoed off the walls. Her hooves splashed against the water on the floor each time she passed a puddle. She didn't know where she was, or where the path was going. She didn't know what happened to Pinkie Pie. She didn't know what happened to Rainbow Dash. She only knew that she had to go forward right now. The hallway turned. Fluttershy followed it. It turned again. She turned as well. The water was growing deeper. Soon, each hoof was splashing through water with every step she took. She stumbled for a moment, adjusting herself to walking through the water with only 3 hooves, but she managed to catch herself. The hallway turned once more. Fluttershy went along. The long, winding corridor seemed to be leading her, guiding her, to where it wanted to take her. She almost had no choice in the matter. Even if she wanted to, she could feel that there was no going back now that she had come this far. Once she had crossed that doorway, there was no turning back. Just before her, the path opened up and split. A path to her left, a path to her right, and in the middle stood a door right before her. The door was different, though. It wasn't made out of the same rotting material as the other doors she'd seen, or of rustic metal, or anything that would fit in with the drenched world that she found herself in. The door looked exactly like the door to her house back in Ponyville, in great condition despite the environment. She carefully walked up to the door, pushed it open as she walked into the room it led to. "Well, this is the best place I can think of," Rainbow Dash said while flying with Fluttershy to the outskirts of Ponyville, to a small, empty cottage stood close to the edge of the Everfree Forest. An old "for sale" sign stood before the property. "No one wants to live here since it's so close to the Everfree Forest, but with your love for animals, that might work for you." "Wow, looks great." Fluttershy smiled quietly, walking up to the house. Fluttershy opened the door and looked inside. The house was dusty from disuse, but everything appeared to be in good condition still. It even came with furniture wrapped in cloth, waiting for some pony to unwrap them, for use once more. Fluttershy wandered the home as Rainbow Dash entered the house after her. She could see everything she could do with the home. She could make spots for animals to live. She could set up the closet to hold her supplies. She could set up several soft chairs for resting and tables for eating. The kitchen seemed to have everything she'd need to cook, the perfect meals, and water that still run in the bathroom. "Oh, Rainbow Dash, it's perfect!" Fluttershy smiled happily, returning to the living room. "You like it, huh? All right, then I'll buy it for you." Rainbow grinned. Fluttershy looked at her speechlessly. No. I could never ask you to do that. It's so much money. I can work to pay for it myself." Fluttershy fumbled for her words. "Don't worry about it. This house is like dirt cheap right now, and I make plenty of money from my job here. Heck, there's even talk of promoting me." Rainbow waved her hoof at Fluttershy, trying to dismiss her worries. But still, I couldn't ask you to do that for me." Fluttershy frowned, not wanting to take so much of Rainbow's charity. It was a huge investment just for her. She didn't feel worthy of it. "Hey, just think of it as my apology for running out on you at school." Rainbow smiled weakly. "So, in return, you make this house your perfect home, all right? I know you had one in mind. You used to speak about it all the time when I last saw you." Rainbow chuckled. Fluttershy stared at the mare before her, still stupefied. She slowly looked around the house once more. "The perfect home," she thought to herself. "Something I never had as a filly, but I have the ability to make one come true now." She smiled softly as she felt tears begin to form gently at the edges of her eyes. "I will." Fluttershy wiped her eyes gently. turning to face Rainbow Dash. "I'll make this my perfect home." The door dimmed from the bright light that had filled her vision. The memories had flooded her vision before she had a chance to prepare for them. But now that the memories had faded, she could see the room for what it was. The room was laid out similarly to her living room, though it looked like it had when she moved in, covered in dust, with cloth covering all the furniture. Fluttershy was silent. She wasn't sure what to make of the images she had just seen. It was her memory of moving to Ponyville, after she had come to find Rainbow Dash. They had an amazing reunion, and when she told Dash she was going to move to Ponyville, Dash helped her so much in finding a place to live. That memory, I don't remember thinking that. I didn't have a perfect home before. Fluttershy speaks softly, surprised by her own thoughts. She didn't doubt she felt that way, but she couldn't remember why she would feel that way about her home. A glint of light caught her eye as she turned to look at the back wall of the room. Something was hanging from the wall. She quickly walked up to the item, seeing that it was a key with the mark of a butterfly on it. Not sure what to make of it, she carefully picked it up and placed it in her bag. She exited the room, stepping her hooves back into the few inches of deep water in the hallway. She now had a choice: go down the hallway to her left, or the one to her right. Taking a guess, she began to walk slowly down the left path, listening to the sloshing over her hooves as she walked. She didn't walk too far before she stopped, staring at what was standing perfectly still in the path, blocking her movement. A mannequin seemed to be frozen in place on the path. It was just sitting there. Her music box wasn't making a sound, and it didn't seem to have a desire to attack her, but it just seemed to be waiting for her, blocking her path forward. She carefully stepped backwards away from the creature. It soon disappeared from her sights once more. She turned herself around and began heading down the right path, wanting to stay away from any path that led to monsters, if she could avoid it. The right path wasn't long, though, as it came to a rather abrupt end, not too far away from the fork. However, at the end was another door, though this one was different. It wasn't like the door to her cottage. This time, the door reminded her of the ones she would see back at the flight school. She took in a deep breath and slowly pushed the door open, heading inside. "Now, you listen to me," her father said gruffly as the two of them stood outside the flight school in Cloudsdale. "It's required for you to go to school, so you'll go every day they have it. You'll do everything your teachers tell you, and you'll come straight home unless you ask permission to do otherwise. And if you're good, I'll likely allow your request." He sounded very stern. "But every other rule from home still applies. You don't talk unless spoken to. You don't tell anyone anything unnecessarily. You obey everything the adults say, unless I overrule them. Do you understand?" Yes, sir," Philly Fluttershy squeaked in response, never looking her father in the eye, keeping her head low. "If you understand, then I'll see you at home later tonight," he said, turning away from her, spreading his wings out and flying off. For the first time, Fluttershy lifted her head to look at her father flying away. Even from there, she could see the scalpel that adorned his flank as he flew off. She let out a soft sigh, thankful that he had left. She looked up at the school before her. There were lots of young and old Pegasi flying into the building. Many were hugging and saying goodbye to their parents. Many were meeting up with friends, and many looked reluctant to head into the school. It was the first day of school. Fluttershy was happy that she'd have a reason to be somewhere else other than her home, or the hospital. But the faces of so many Pegasi she hadn't met before intimidated her. She was scared of them. She gulped down the lump in her throat, and slowly began to walk into the school. It seemed almost every other Pegasi was flying inside. She felt like she stood out like a sore hoof walking into the building. but there was a spark of hope in her heart that hadn't been there before. Light faded from the room as the memory came to an end. The room she was left in looked like an abandoned school hallway, though cut off short by a sudden erected wall. Rusted lockers lined the walls as a broken clock hung over them. The entire area was covered in dust from disuse. Was my father always that stern? Fluttershy wondered to herself, not having realized her father had talked down to her like that. And I was afraid of him, but why was I afraid of my father? She asked herself, unable to find the answers within her memories. Then she realized what was going on. Deep within, there are secrets laid to rest, Fluttershy murmured, remembering the puzzle on the door. This place is showing me memories I forgot. Or more accurately, memories I suppressed. Fluttershy felt a lump form in her throat. If I forgot about these memories, I must have forgotten them for a reason. Fluttershy did her best to gulp the lump that had formed in her throat. She walked carefully to the back of the room, noticing that the key was sitting there. She picked it up, examining it. The key had a shape of a cloud on it. She carefully placed the key in her bag before exiting the room. Her hooves returned to the water-filled hallway once more. She hesitated for a moment, but she headed down the hallway where the mannequin had been standing before. It was the next place she had to check. She couldn't go back now. She rounded the bend in the hallway, swallowing to keep her nerves as she drew closer to where the mannequin had been standing. But it was gone now, as if it had been standing guard, waiting for her to see the second memory. It had vanished from its position. Fluttershy counted her blessings at this. She couldn't handle any more injuries to her body. She imagined what state her body was in. Any more damage would possibly cause more serious injuries, ones she couldn't fix herself. If she got an internal injury now, she'd just die a slow, painful death. Every step she was taking was draining her stamina, both physically and mentally. She never imagined walking anywhere on 3 hooves would be so taxing, but it was. As she continued to follow the curving path of the hallway, the water began to become shallower as the pathway drew upwards. She was now walking on dry ground as the hallway began to open up. She reached the end of the hallway, the path opening into a large lobby. Her music box began to hiss softly. Fluttershy turned on her light to look at the room better. Just at the edge of her light, she saw a nurse pacing. It walked on the other side of the table in the middle of the room, before turning and walking back into the darkness. Fluttershy watched the darkness carefully. When the nurse then reappeared at the edge of her light, it walked the same path it had when she first saw it, before it turned and walked back into the darkness. The nurse seemed to be walking in a pattern, as if waiting for something to disturb it, or ruin its routine. Fluttershy very carefully drew closer to the table, but the nurse didn't seem to notice. Fluttershy's eyes turned to the table the nurse kept walking by, seeing something shine upon it. It was another key. She paused carefully, waiting for the nurse to walk by and head away from the table, her music box hissing as it stepped closer to Fluttershy, before growing quieter when the nurse stepped back away from her. Once the coast was clear, she quickly walked up to the table and grabbed the key, before backing up before the nurse got close once more. She examined the key carefully, seeing that there was a symbol of a red cross on it. She placed the key in her bag and looked around the room. Other than the circling nurse, there was nothing unusual around the broken chairs and rotting walls. To one side, she could see an extended wall with a door on it, and a bookshelf along the wall past it. Then, just past the circling nurse, looked to be a small hallway, through what was beyond it to be too dark to see at the moment. She carefully walked around the table, making her way to the door she could see. She pushed the door open, heading inside. Her music box became quiet, as a familiar light flashed before her eye. Ah! Filly Fluttershy whimpered, as the nurse applied the alcohol to her cuts. Don't be such a crybaby. The nurse rolled her eyes a little, before pulling away the cotton ball and placing a band-aid on the wound. You should really be used to this by now. You're always coming in here with the same problem. Honestly, I don't know why your father doesn't just take care of you at home. The nurse said begrudgingly, as she walked away from the table Fluttershy sat on in the corner. That's because... Fluttershy whimpered softly. The nurse snapped her head to glare at Fluttershy. Fluttershy instantly shut her mouth. She shrunk back into the table, trying to avoid the glare of the nurse. The nurse, once satisfied that the filly wouldn't say anything, turned back to the counter, organizing her items. The door to the room clicked open, as Fluttershy sat straight up, her whole body turning stiff as her father strolled into the room, before closing the door. Is everything fine with my daughter? Was the first thing he asked. The nurse pony instantly turned to him, her whole face lighting up, as if his mere presence brought her joy. Of course, sir. You know I always do the finest work when I can, when you're asking me to, the nurse said, batting her eyelashes flirtatiously at the doctor, smiling, almost as if her life depended on it. Fluttershy's father didn't look too impressed by the flirtation, and turned to look at his daughter. His daughter sat straight up, shivering as she sat on the table, afraid of what her father might do or say. Have you recovered from your accident? Her father asked with a stern, overbearing tone, as if he didn't actually care that she had recovered. Yes, sir. Fluttershy stuttered and squeaked, her whole body shaking as she stared straight ahead, not making eye contact with him. If you are, then leave. You can do as you wish. I'll be in the lobby by 9, and I'll take you home. Her father almost growled. Yes, sir. Fluttershy instantly jumped up off the table, and practically bolted out of the room, closing it behind her. She panted a little outside the door, as her heart beat inside her chest. Oh, Doctor. Fluttershy heard the nurse almost moan from inside the room. She didn't stick around to hear more. She ran away from the room. She'd be in the lobby when her father told her to be there. But she'd be as far away from him as she could until then. The light faded away, revealing a room similar to the one that she had just seen in the vision, only, much like the rest of the world, falling apart, broken into pieces, covered in dust. A chill ran down Fluttershy's back as she recovered from the returning memories. She was scared of her father. She was scared of him, but she didn't remember what he did to make her scared of him. But she had an idea. Did my father abuse me? She muttered the words to herself. She didn't want to believe that he did, but everything was falling into place that he did. Maybe she was jumping to conclusions. Maybe she was blowing it out of proportions. Or maybe he'd just punished her too severely once by accident, and hadn't made amends yet. Or maybe I'm trying to make excuses for my father. She sighed out loud as she lowered her head a little. I have to know the full story, Fluttershy said, lifting her head up. If I don't find out now, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Fluttershy gulped once more. She walked carefully to the end of the room, where on the table she spotted a similar key to the others she had gathered. This one seemed to have the symbol of a needle. She carefully placed it alongside the other keys. She exited the room, and the hissing of her music box returned, as the pacing nurse returned to her sight. Fluttershy carefully moved her lantern to get a better view of the room, seeing if she was forgetting anything. A similar glint caught her eye in the corner of the room, the glint coming from the worn-down bookcase that lay against the wall, just outside of the nurse's pacing range. She waited for the nurse to circle through the path once more, then quickly rushed over to the bookcase. Making sure the nurse didn't turn its attention to her, she looked at the bookcase. It seemed to be filled with rotting medical books, ones she saw a lot as a foal, but they were all illegible now. Hanging loosely on one of the rotting rows was another key, this one with a symbol of a book on it. She carefully placed it in her bag before turning to watch the nurse once more. The only place she had left to go was the hallway the nurse seemed to be pacing just in front of. Fluttershy watched the nurse carefully. It seemed she'd just have a few seconds at best to run past the nurse and get in the hallway, with her being the furthest away from it as she could. She remembered the last time she got too close to a nurse. It screamed, and it had summoned. A cold shiver ran down her spine again. She couldn't face that creature again. If she faced it, it would no doubt be able to kill her this time. She took a deep breath and waited. She counted the number of times the nurse walked in a circle before her. She didn't want to screw up the timing by even 1 second. 10 times. 15 times. 20 times. She didn't want to move, but she knew she had to. She steeled her nerves, stretching her 3 hooves, and crouching down as she aimed for the door. She ran as fast as her hooves would take her past the nurse, stayed as far away from it as possible. The hallway came up on her blind side, but she knew where it was. She turned as soon as she needed to, and moved down the hallway, away from the nurse. She skidded to a halt as the hallway came to an abrupt end. She had almost run straight into a heavy chained metal door. It took her eye a moment to focus on the door, but once it did, she could see everything. There were 5 padlocks, holding the chains to the metal door behind it, that seemed to have something written on it, but it was blocked by the chains. She recognized each of the symbols on the locks instantly. They matched the keys that she had just gathered from around the area. Being careful, but swift, she pulled out each key one by one and placed them in their corresponding lock. Each lock and key fell to the ground, seeming to shatter against the ground. When the final lock fell, the chains fell with it, the chains seeming to shatter to pieces when they hit the ground. The door was now free, and she could see what was written on the door. Strains of the heart, chained up memories. Will things be the same? You know what is true. You are not what you think you are. But feelings are strong. They can change everything, or they can change nothing. Experience the sins of another. Then, perhaps, the threads of destiny will make their feelings known. Fluttershy looked at the poem and read it carefully. She read it at least 3 times, not fully understanding what it meant. A shiver ran down her spine as she read it, though. She got this feeling in her gut of her stomach. It was the feeling that it was trying to warn her about her future, telling her that she had something important to do once she crossed the door. I can't be scared off now, she said out loud to herself quietly, before reaching a hoof up and pushing the door open. Fluttershy almost felt blown back. A wave of heat struck her as the door opened. She shielded her eyes from the heat. It felt like an inferno was burning on the other side of the door. She slowly moved her eyes to where the fire was coming from. The room just before her was undoubtedly covered in flames. Fluttershy's jaw dropped a little, staring into the flames. Fluttershy slowly walked into the room, looking around. She could feel the heat all around her, and she was having difficulty discerning the appearance of the room. The door shut behind her as the vision began to clear. She was inside what looked like an abandoned house she had entered in Ponyville, only covered in fire. She looked around. The fire was everywhere. It seemed that the house should have burned down to the ground already, yet it somehow was managing to stay upright, despite the flames. But something stood out in the flames. Her eye turned to focus on the figure that stood in the flames, looking at a picture that hung on the wall. It was a blue Pegasus with a rainbow mane. "Rainbow Dash!" Fluttershy called out, surprised, but happy to see her mare friend alive and okay. She tried to draw closer, but a wave of fire seemed to stand between her and Rainbow Dash. Rainbow Dash continued to stand in the same place, staring at the picture as if she hadn't heard Fluttershy call out. "Rainbow Dash?" Fluttershy called out once more. "It's all the same, you know?" Rainbow Dash muttered quietly, not looking away from the picture. "Huh?" Fluttershy responded, confused by her words. "I can't believe I didn't see it before. But it really always has been like this." Rainbow Dash closed her eyes for a moment, before opening them. "Always running, away. Always getting away when I don't care anymore." Rainbow Dash? What are you talking about?" Rainbow Dash just seemed to pause for a moment, before a small laugh came from her. "I'm the element of loyalty. What a load of crud that is." Rainbow closed her eyes as a small smile faded from her face. "All I ever do is abandon. I've never cared about my friends or loved ones. I've only ever cared about myself. There's a better life for me out there. I don't want to be held down by your rules. I don't care about clearing the sky for you. I don't care about you as a friend anymore. I'm going to abandon you for my own desires." Dash seemed to be imitating herself. "But, Rainbow Dash, you don't abandon your friends?" Fluttershy offered a meek protest. "Ha! Are you blind?" Rainbow Dash half laughed, half cried. "After you got separated from us, I abandoned Pinkie Pie to go find you. I yelled at her. I blamed her for getting us into this mess. I said that if you died, this would be all her fault." Rainbow Dash shook her head softly. "And I've hurt you the worst, with my abandonment. And you still want to say I don't? I abandoned you at flight school when you needed me. All because I didn't care to be held down." Rainbow lowered her head, a sad grin on her face, as she seemed to be accepting the truth just as much as she was telling it. But, that was a long time ago. Things have changed." Fluttershy started, but she was interrupted by Dash. "You know, Fluttershy, when you joined the Wonderbolts, there's a minimum 1-year mandatory private training you have to go through to learn all about their techniques and flight patterns, to fly with the Wonderbolts successfully. They perform shows year-round, all over Equestria." It's almost seemed like Dash didn't want to say this. "When I make my dream come true, I'm leaving Ponyville. I'm leaving behind my friends. I'm leaving you behind. I'll be abandoning you once again." Fluttershy's mouth was agape, unable to comprehend Dash's words. No, more accurately, she didn't want to comprehend her words. They felt like needles trying to jab into her heart. But, hey, why should that change now? Dash lifted her head up and looked at the picture before her. "I ran away from home. I quit flight school. I give up friends just because I don't see eye to eye anymore. And I'll get rid of all my friends just for some silly dream." The sad grin returned to Dash's face. "I burn all the bridges I've made in my life, so that I can never look back at what I've done." "Dash," Fluttershy muttered weakly. "I'm sorry you fell in love with some pony like me, Fluttershy." Rainbow's voice cracked, as if she was holding back tears. "I'm not one who deserves it." Dash looked away from the picture, putting her back to Fluttershy. "You should forget about me." Dash began to slowly walk away, walking towards the doorway Fluttershy couldn't reach through the burning flames. "Rainbow Dash, wait!" Fluttershy cried out. Rainbow Dash stopped in her tracks for a moment, as if she didn't want to. but she had to hear what Fluttershy needed to say. Rainbow Dash. Fluttershy whimpered a little, feeling tears burning at the edges of her eyes. She gulped the lump in her throat and lifted her head, summoning all the courage she could muster in her heart. I need you to be strong right now, all right? Dash didn't react or move right away. She stood there, as if the words seemed to slowly sink in. But after a time, she finally spoke up. All right, was the only word that escaped from Rainbow, before she disappeared into the doorway before her, being shrouded by the fire that filled the house. For a moment, Fluttershy thought she had seen tears fall from Dash's face. Fluttershy lowered her head as tears began to fall from her eye, rolling down her cheek and down her chin. She didn't care how hot she felt, or that the fires were still burning so close to her. She just had to cry right now.